Yeah, the suggestions that I would have for someone who's already tried everything they could to get it under control and find themselves like hopelessly hooked, and returning to them again and again, and dependent on the games for feeling good about themselves, for dealing with stress and anxiety, is to realize that you're not alone, that there have been many thousands or millions of people who've gone through similar things, and that it is possible to stop gaming completely and turn our lives around for the better.
Okay, so welcome once again to the MvR podcast. I'm here today with Scott. So say hello, Scott.
Hello.
Scott, nice to have you on the podcast. We're going to be talking about video games today and video game addiction. And I know that many people struggle with this. It's the 21st century after all. But Scott, who are you? Why are you here?
Yeah, I've had quite a few problems with video games. I struggled for several years to get a balance with them, or try to get them under control, because they were interfering with my relationships and with work. They were interfering with my sleep and my health, taking care of myself. And I found that every single strategy that I tried to get it under control, I ended up having some short-term successes and always long-term failure. So eventually I hit a point of realizing I just had to stop. And so ever since I reached that point, I've been involved in a fellowship, like a recovery fellowship of people who have struggled with similar things. And together we support each other in staying off games completely.
Very good. And what's the name of this recovery fellowship?
It's Computer Gaming Addicts Anonymous.
Okay, I'll put it in the description down below. Yeah, and so just out of interest, did you have a particular game of choice that was a major problem for you?
I had games that I threw myself into the most at different points in my life. I've had problems with all different types of games, you name it. The one that I really threw myself into for a couple of years was actually an online gambling game that involved a lot of money. But even after I cut out that game and never touched any gambling games again, I continued to have problems with every other type of video game that I played.
Yeah, so you've gone cold turkey. And how long have you been not playing games for now?
Now it's been 7 years.
Excellent. All right. And so how has your life changed since you stopped?
Yeah, it's changed in a lot of ways. You see, when my gaming was out of control and I was trying to get it under control, but continuing to throw myself back into the games and using it to deal with stress, deal with problems, like escape, like frustration and struggles I was having in my relationship and with work and other things. It was the amount of time that I was gaming and my obsession with it, and especially how it cut into my sleep and created chronic sleep deprivation. That went on for months and years, where I was not getting nearly enough sleep. And so, severe sleep deprivation really messes up people's heads. So it affected everything. Like, I wasn't exercising. I had dropped all my hobbies. I was out of touch with old friends. I was isolating from people and letting my social life die. Things were going pretty bad at work. I had troubles in my relationship. I wasn't mentally present when I was with my son. So these are the problems I had. But to answer your question of like how have things improved, like every single area of my life has improved, because every single area of my life used to be so severely impacted by my gaming. So I get the sleep that I need today, so that my head isn't so messed up, and my mood is better. I can remember things better. I show up when I'm supposed to do something. So I'm more responsible. Things are much better at work. I'm making more money because I get paid by the hour, and I'm no longer gaming during work hours, which was causing problems both financially and in my
Yep.
relationship. Um, Not only have I got back into some of my old hobbies, but I started new ones, started playing music, started playing with a band. I'm much more mentally present with my son and in a much better mood. So I'm not as impatient. I don't, I don't bark at him in anger if I get frustrated like I used to do when I was so severely sleep deprived and feeling really terrible about myself. So I'm in a much better place. And mentally I don't want to isolate as much. My social life has come back, and yeah, so and all these things build on each other too. Like I get the sleep that I need, so I have better
Yep.
energy, and so my mood is better, and that gives me more motivation to put into my work or into my relationships, my social life, or other projects or hobbies that I have going on, which helps my self-esteem, which helps yeah, it just helps motivation to keep plugging into these new things, and taking care of myself, and enjoying the good life that I have today.
You're kind of like in an upward spiral now, right? You're sort of going up and up and up, and things just build on each other and get better and better. By the way, I've got many questions, but many people who have had a dopamine fix for so long, on video games or whatever, they often end up with some kind of replacement to that. Did you get hooked on anything else after you quit video games, like something different?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the early months of being off games are very difficult, right? And I just had these habits, these entrenched habits of like constantly turning to the computer when I wasn't feeling good, or seeking entertainment, or just like isolating from people, and jumping on the computer when I was going through anything difficult. So yeah, naturally, I mean, all that energy, all those patterns don't disappear just because I stopped gaming. So those were there for, especially in the first 6 months of being off games. I struggled with that a lot. So what I threw myself into, a lot of it was just turning to the computer. So that could be like watching videos on the computer, or just surfing online, or yeah, just other ways of just blowing off steam, and wasting time on the computer. But 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 it's different. I mean, it's not the way I look at it now. That's fine. That's the transition that I had to go through, and I don't regret,
Mm-hmm.
watching way too many videos during that time, because because that was, watching all those videos was eating up some of my time, but it was also keeping me off the games and allowing me to heal, allowing me to get the sleep that I needed, allowing me to break the patterns of gaming all the time, and put some distance between me and the game. So in some ways, those crutches that I had in the early days were useful.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense that you'll need to have a crutch to move away from the addiction. I've got a question then. So when did you start actually playing in the first place? Like, how old were you when you started?
Uh, I'm not sure. I might have been 9 or 10 when my family got our first video game system, an Atari, like back in the 80s. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the Atari probably was not that addictive because it's pretty low resolution. Can you remember, like, what age did you really start, sort of? Because I think this is actually a really important question. What age did you really start to find getting, that point where you really were hooked? Because like I said, if you're on the Atari and you're playing like black and white games, you probably can't get. It's a bit more difficult to get hooked on that. But when did you start to really be hooked on it?
And it was much later in life for me. Yeah, I did not become obsessive and compulsive with the Atari or the Nintendo games that I played when I was younger. And in fact, when I went off to college, in those days, in the early '90s, like I was the only one that brought a video game system with me to my college
Oh my
dorm,
god.
and when I saw no one else had them, I just returned mine home, and I hardly played any games at all for the next 10 years.
Nice.
Um, and it wasn't until it was in my 30s, and then I started playing some of these more modern games. I tried out some of the big role playing games. Briefly, I didn't spend a lot of time with those because they so immediately sucked me in so deeply that
Mm-hmm.
that I ended up like setting those aside and playing other games instead. But yeah, so for me, it wasn't until like early mid 30s that I started gaming obsessively and compulsively.
I've got to say the story is a bit different to what you usually hear. Yeah, I mean, you think about, imagine you were getting hooked on in your 30s. Imagine that those games are available to
Right.
12-year-olds now. And that's what teenagers are playing. And you've got World of Warcraft and MMOs. I don't know, League of Legends. You've got tons of these games that are way more. Yeah, like you said, you got hooked on it in your 30s, which means that what year was that? Like 2010 or something? Like when was that? Do you know?
Yeah, no, around 2005, six, around there.
This is when things really started to hype up. Um, and yeah, the games have gotten so good, and not only that, but the business, the money in the video games has gone up dramatically. And what that means is that when there is so much money involved in something, people will start to look at the games from a much more business perspective. It's like, okay, how can we make the most money possible from these games? Because we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's really important that our players keep playing the games and they don't turn them off. Because if they turn them off, we will lose hundreds of millions of dollars. So, okay, what can we do? Well, we could try and encourage dopamine hits. We can try to encourage addictive behaviors, basically. And this is certainly what MMOs do. I don't know about other types of games, like shooters do to an extent, in that they will, when you kill someone, you get like a number will pop up, or like an award, like congratulations. Every time you kill somebody, you'll get some kind of on-screen reward, which encourages a dopamine hit. And so yeah, this is a business model that a lot of who plays video games the most. Well, it's the addicts. So it's in their interest to have people addicted to their games. So you did not play MMOs then? You did not play MMORPGs very much, is that right?
Right, yeah, I played them for a short time. Maybe it was over 6 months. But the gambling game that I played for a couple of years was, it involved like a lot of people. It was an online game involving a lot of other people, and so there was definitely that aspect of getting into games where lots of other people were involved.
Right, and the social aspect is probably one of the worst, because it gives you a community within this kind of virtual box that everybody is in, and it makes it normalized, and it makes playing long hours normalized as well. You have friends that are on there; they're playing 10 hours a day. So if you're playing 9 hours a day, it's like, oh well, it's pretty normal. 9 hours,
Yes.
right? I know I've got friends that play 12 hours, so it's normal. So yeah, that social aspect and actually having a friend. When you are on these games, did you ever have a friendship group on the games?
Yes, yeah, and that was definitely that was a strong pull that kept me coming back to the games. Sure.
Because you have a community, it's like you have friendships, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really because the thing is, what seems to happen is that you have sort of the illusion of progress, right? Because as humans, we are built, we want to improve ourselves, we want to get more resources, we want to get more food, get better caves or whatever, like from our hunter-gatherer times. But so in the virtual box of a video game, you're sort of pursuing, you're following your natural instincts to improve yourself, but they're being hijacked. You're improving yourself in a virtual box, and then when you step outside this virtual box, all of your improvement means nothing. And all you've been doing is basically paying the producer. If it's an online game that you pay a monthly subscription for, at least it's you are paying the business owner. You're giving them your time and your money, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, and my story, I'm sure my story would be vastly different if when I had started getting into gaming, at 10 years old and playing when I was 15 years old. If these sorts of games had been available to me then, my story would probably be very different than what it is. Because I was definitely ripe for addiction. I did end up developing a serious problem with alcohol and needing to stop drinking. So if I had these modern games available to me, filling that sort of those kind of needs that I was trying to meet by drinking with friends and partying and boozing out, then maybe I would have never drank at all, and just been a gaming addict right from the start.
There is something called, some people are particularly prone to addiction, right? There's like some kind of chemical something in the brain where some certain people are more vulnerable to that. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard that some people are more susceptible to others. I'm not, yeah, it hasn't become perfectly clear to me what the reason is behind that, but I've heard people say that it has a lot more to do with the amount and the level of like trauma that people go through as children, that dysfunction and emotional pain and an inability to cope with life has a lot more to do with whether or not someone falls into addiction than some of the other factors.
Addiction is really complex. I've looked into addiction a few times, and every time it's like, okay, this is a deep rabbit hole. So we're not going to be able to put our fingers exactly on where addiction lies. But here's something interesting as well. There are still, what I can't believe, which I find really crazy, is that there are still psychologists and people that still believe that video game addiction is not a thing. They say it's not real. And I think I can't remember if this is correct, but I think in 2017 they finally, I think they finally classified video game addiction as like a real thing. Only in 2017. Can you understand this? Like the people that say, "Oh, it's not like real."
No, it doesn't make any sense to me, because my experience, not just with myself, but with hundreds and hundreds of other people, with a variety of addictions, makes it perfectly clear to me that there is this thing that should be called an addiction disorder, that is a mental disorder that has to do with trying to cope with stress or emotional pain or dysfunction, and it develops into these mental attributes of obsession, compulsion, denial, lying about the behavior, hiding it, it progressively getting worse over time, and all of these symptoms and signs are well documented, and they're laid out really well on the webpage of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. And the way that they define it, they don't define it in terms of a specific type of addiction, and wrote it in a way that it applies to drinking as much as it applies to gaming or gambling or drugging or sex or overeating or shopping or any of the other behaviors that someone can become, pathologically obsessive and compulsive about.
It's pretty clear to me that it's an addiction. I mean, I've known people that can't stop playing. of course it's a real addiction. It's just these sort of psychologists that they don't have their solid evidence that they want yet. They don't have causation or whatever. But it's pretty clear by looking at the world that it's a real addiction. What was I going to say? Yeah, it's clearly real. I can't understand that. And it's weird because it seems to me that, so we're up to 2019 now, and technology is getting more and more advanced, and that also means that there's more and more addictions available to us all the time. You call them super stimuli, right? So you've got hyped up fast food, junk food. You've got social media. You've got porn, just like hypersexual images, and of course you've got video games, which are becoming more and more of a problem, or more and more extreme stimuli each year. I've heard a lot about Fortnite recently. As well. It seems like in the modern world, there are so many traps that you can fall into, that there should really be some kind of education on avoiding these traps. For example, porn addiction, video game addiction, and somewhat. But there's no education. When you were at school, even when I'm younger than you, but when I was at school, there was no particular education about technology addiction. Like, there's nothing. I can't believe that nobody warned us about this kind of addiction. Shouldn't there be some kind of education in school?
Right. Yeah. That, like, I'd never heard of it. It was not on my radar at all. When I got sober, and was recovering from alcoholism, I was purposely avoiding other things that I thought were addictive. Like I didn't want to go to the casino with friends. I didn't want to start developing a gambling habit, which I did end up doing later. But yeah, when I started gaming, it was not on my radar at all that this could possibly become a full-blown, addiction for me.
Yeah, and it's hard because technology is moving so fast that education hasn't kept up. That everybody knows about drugs and alcohol and gambling, but those addictions have been around for a long time, whereas video game addiction is pretty new. So everybody that is growing up at this time is kind of in that transition phase where we're not really many people aren't aware of the problems with it yet. And I also want to talk to you about because in the future, the fact is that these games are just going to get more and more enticing in the future. We have VR fast approaching.
Right.
People with their headsets on. What do you think the future is going to be like with VR video games? Like, it sounds like a nightmare scenario, actually.
Yes. Yeah, I've thought of this. I expect, yeah, like I've seen the pattern of the games becoming more and more compelling. And the hooks that they have, like many of these hooks do to some extent try to satisfy real life needs. We have needs for accomplishment. We have needs for a social connection. We have needs for like belonging to a group. We have needs to deal with stress or to have fun. And I think, yeah, as the technology progresses, they in many ways do a better job of like trying to meet these needs and bringing people into them even further, and relying on them even more instead of the real world relationships and opportunities and activities that will actually satisfy those needs that they have.
What's really scary is the fact that VR, once it gets more sophisticated, is going to be big business as well. So the people are going to be making lots of money off it, which means that as they are now, they're going to be very incentivized to put these hooks, like you say, into the games. Actually, I'm not so much worried about just VR in general. Like if you had a game where you were just playing baseball or something, or playing basketball, it's not such a big deal to me, but it's a combination of having VR and these hooks that they purposely put in the games together. You have a really immersive experience and you have the so-called hooks. Like, for example, especially on MMOs. There's something. Have you heard of the term a variable ratio? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, I've heard of that. Isn't it like a part of what makes gambling so compelling and addictive is the variability of getting rewards.
That's exactly right. So just to give you an idea of how deep this goes, I think it was in like 1940. There was a guy called Skinner, right? B.F. Skinner, and he put pigeons into a box, and he fed them food pellets through the side of the box. And the first thing he did, he used a fixed ratio, where if the bird pecked the button in the box, it would be given some food every time, right? And this worked pretty well. The pigeon would peck that button quite often at a steady rate. After that, he changed the rate to a variable ratio, and that's where the pellets come into the box randomly. Not a fixed ratio, but a random variable reward ratio. So randomly, the food pellets would fall into the box. And once he did this, the pigeon or the bird started basically going crazy and pecking the button over and over again, just like hitting it way more than before. So this is what a variable ratio does. This is like gambling when you're pulling the slot machine. People get hooked on that. And it's also like loot drops in video games. You know, if you're playing an MMO and you kill a monster, you have like a 1 in 1,000 chance of receiving a really expensive item or whatever. So because it's random, people will just try it over and over again. And it's just like gambling. It's really addictive. And like you said, you are on a gambling game yourself. So I'm not surprised about that.
Yep. Yeah, and the funny thing was when it got out of control and I decided to stop playing that game, my hope was that my problem had actually been like a gambling addiction, because I wasn't very much into gambling, and I figured I could just set that aside pretty easily. But I've found that I've played poker face to face and other gambling games without it being triggering to me at all. But if I play any type of video game at all, it starts the whole obsession and compulsion that I've struggled with video games.
Yeah, it's really really tough, because especially as VR comes around. Like I said, it is a virtual box. So right now the games are 2D, right? They're just on a screen, and people are already incredibly hooked in by them and have addiction to them. So once that turns 3D, I have no idea what's going to happen with that.
There will be people who will never want to leave them, for sure.
Sure, I mean, people do it with 2D games already. So if you just add a 3D element to that, it's just there's no way it's going to get better. I mean, it's definitely going to get worse. Yeah, VR is scary, actually. Yeah, it's crazy. And yeah, it's just such a shame, because I think that. So what do you say to people? Because some people will talk about the potential benefits of playing video games, right? Like they talk about improving their reaction time, or improving, learning about business and stuff. If you go on an MMORPG, there's like an economy, and you learn a little bit about business and making money and things like that. What would you say to people that are sort of telling themselves that there are benefits to playing these games?
I'm not sure. I think there may well be some certain benefits like that, and well, I don't know. I have to state that just as there's only a small percentage of drinkers who become alcoholics, and there's actually a small percentage of people who have used morphine and heroin that actually become addicts. The same is true of video games. It's a small percentage. I've seen numbers between 2% and 8% is what professionals have estimated. So for people who are not addicted, which is the vast majority of gamers, there may very well be benefits that they're getting out of video games. I'm not sure. I know for people who become completely obsessive and compulsive about it, the problems and the losses, the lost opportunities, the pain, and that we go through, and the negative effects it has on every area of our life just completely obliterates whatever small amounts of benefit there might be in video games.
Yeah, I agree. Um, because I often find that people who are playing video games a lot, they will kind of cling to these small benefits, as a way of telling themselves that it's actually this is benefiting me somehow. It's like it's benefiting you in a very minor way, and also you'll be much better to get these benefits through playing sport or just acting in the real world. It doesn't make sense to try to improve yourself inside a virtual box. It's like you can, if you like, a good solution is you can kind of play life like a video game, right? You can kind of level up in your life. You can improve your money situation. You can improve your strength stat, right? Level up your strength in the gym. It doesn't make sense to put time into a digital life, because you end up with nothing at the end. All of that time just disappears, and your real life doesn't just stay the same. It actually gets much worse.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Like I mentioned before, I mean, some of the hooks that video games have are that they to some extent try to meet real needs that we have. Um, but yeah, with all of those, like the things that they're trying to mimic in real life, like the real life things, the real social life, the real accomplishments, the real challenges, the real improvements and progress that we make in our lives. Yeah, all of that meets our needs in much more natural and fulfilling ways that complete that the video games counterparts just pale in comparison.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's like it's a really strange thing because these video games, they are two things at once, okay? On the one hand, they are a super stimuli. And what a super stimuli is, it's a stimuli that is available in the natural world. For example, improving yourself, right? That's what you want. But that your improvement is sort of hyped up, and on video games it's way faster and it's way more constant. Whenever you're always gaining experience points or whatever. For every little thing you do, you get experience points. All the time you have a visual demonstration of your improvement. So it's like a dramatic version of self-improvement in the real world. In the real world, you don't have experience points. Like improvement takes much longer. It's much slower. So it's like a super stimuli for improving yourself, if that makes sense. But on the other hand, it's also an incomplete stimuli, which means that all the things that you're getting from the video game, you can get them much better in the real world. It just takes longer. It's just an incomplete version of reality, basically.
Yeah, no, I'd say, yeah, it might take longer, and also you don't get you don't have like a gauge of progress. You don't have a meter going up. You don't have a number that's getting bigger. So with many things in real life, we actually are making lots of bits of progress. It's just we don't recognize it, or we don't get the feedback from other people sometimes, or we don't have a gauge or a measure of that gives us that constant feedback. But it doesn't mean that the progress isn't there in the real life pursuits.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing we like on the video games is the constant feedback and the telling us that we're getting better. And then you have those big milestones as well, where you reach like a certain level in the game. But again, these levels are meaningless. I forgot what I was gonna say. Yeah. Anyway, so it doesn't make sense to be leveling up in a virtual box. You may as well level up in the real world. It's much more fun and it's much more satisfying. At the end of the day, video games will never be satisfying. They will never be satisfying. Even after they become, let's say in 50 years, you have a virtual reality game which is like almost identical to real life, let's say. Okay, and you have like a second world in the virtual game, and you're playing a incredible game, and you're improving there. It will never be as satisfying as real life, because you will always know, no matter how realistic the VR game is, you always know that it's not happening to you, really. You're not genuinely achieving something, you're just achieving something inside this other virtual game. So I always think that no matter how sophisticated the technology gets, the real world will always be more satisfying. And you have children, right?
Yeah, I have a son.
So, have you thought about, like, how old is he?
9.
So is he on technology and stuff?
Yeah, in small amounts. Yeah.
Have you thought about the sort of exposure to games in the future, like how you will deal with that?
Yeah, I've given it. I've given it plenty of thought. My main concern is not that whether or not he play video games at all. What I don't want to happen for him is what happened to me was where I was trying to meet real life needs through it, where I was trying to cope with stress and emotional pain. So my strategy with him it has a lot more to do with trying to give him the most satisfying and loving and peaceful and functional rather than dysfunctional childhood that I can, so that he's not turning to these sort of artificial sources of dopamine hits when he's older. I believe that's what can prevent addiction. I don't think that just trying to shield kids from video games during childhood, completely block them from playing them, will accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible. At a certain point, he's going to discover that video games exist. He'll try them out, I'm sure. I think you know what you're talking about. Yeah, if he has people with a nice, stable childhood, healthy, they're much less likely to be addicted to anything. So yeah, but the thing is, I always find it kind of disgusting, because in the world there will always be people who have bad experiences when they're younger. That's always going to happen. And there's always going to be times in people's lives where they're very stressed out and they're more vulnerable to addiction, right? It's going to happen to everyone at some point. And I find it kind of gross that these businesses that make these games, like the owner of World of Warcraft, Blizzard, or the owner of many of these games, kind of actually take advantage of that. People's weakness. I mean, there are games where they have loot boxes, right? Do you know what loot boxes are?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So people will pay money to open like a random box that could have an expensive item inside as well. And that's just underage gambling, basically. They allow underage gambling for like 13-year-olds to get them. It's really disgusting, and it is underage gambling, because you might think, okay, but it's just a game, right? But actually, these virtual items actually have real world value as well. You can go onto online marketplaces and you can buy video game items. So they encourage underage gambling, and it's legal. It's very strange. Have you ever sort of been not angry at the sort of the video game creators, like the businesses, ever?
No, I haven't felt that anger myself.
I mean, yeah, these sort of addictive outlets have always existed. There's been drinking. There's alcohol. There's other drugs. There's gambling. Um, you, you know, um, and I don't know. To me, just adding one more isn't. Um, I don't know. I'm not putting this into words very well, but yeah, like
It's all right.
well, I could say for me when I got sober, when I stopped drinking, I did not have resentment, and nor would I have found it helpful to have resentment and anger at beer companies,
True.
or
True.
companies that make hard liquor, or the ones that show advertisements and try to make it look more glamorous than it actually is, and try to hook people into it.
Yeah.
That I don't know. So that wasn't a useful part of my recovery from alcoholism, and it's not been a useful something that I've been
Sure.
trying to, or it's definitely not been a part of my recovery from video gaming addiction.
Sure, yeah, it probably isn't. You just want to focus on yourself, and yeah, you don't really have time to bother with thinking about those things. I still think that these companies should be held accountable. I mean, it's fine when let's say you're selling alcohol or whatever. Here's where I would draw the line. Okay, so I think you should be able to sell alcohol. Of course, it's fun, it's good, but I don't think you should be able to glamorize it in advertising. I think that's crossing the line. Same with video games. You should be able to make video games, but you should not be able to purposefully put addictive hooks into your game. That's really crossing the line. Like, especially when the games are available to teenagers, and you're just going to purposefully put in addictive hooks, very similar to gambling, and just put them in your game. I think that's pretty evil, to be honest, personally.
Yeah, I understand that completely. At the very least, yeah, there should be some transparency there, where any parent who's thinking of buying one of these games for their kids knows that psychologists have advised the gaming companies in how to insert these gambling hooks that ensnare people.
Should be like an asterisk on the game, right? It's like this game contains addictive hooks, psychologically addictive hooks, something like that. Like, it seems reasonable to me. We, but I don't think it's going to happen because I don't know. Nobody. I don't know. The government doesn't really take very fast action on these things. It probably take 20 years before they take any action like that. So we can. So what advice? There will be hopefully, if people do listen to this podcast, I hope they do. Um, there will be a few people listening at some point. They who may be addicted to video games, right? So they could be listening to this, and they're dealing with their addiction. So what would be your advice to somebody to finish up? What would be your advice to somebody who is struggling with video game addiction?
Yeah. Well, it would be different for someone who's just beginning to struggle with it and someone who's already been struggling with it for a while. Because someone who's just beginning to struggle with it is going to do the same thing that I did and the same thing that every other gaming addict does, and that's to try to cut out the worst addictive games, try to cut out certain genres, or try to limit it to certain days of the week, or only playing with other people, or only playing offline, or all these limitations. I mean, someone who's first beginning to struggle with it is going to try all those things out before eventually finding out that none of those things work. So, but the advice, yeah, the suggestions that I would have for someone who's already done that, who's already tried everything they could to get it under control, and find themselves like hopelessly hooked, and returning to them again and again, and dependent on the games for feeling good about themselves, for dealing with stress and anxiety, is to realize that you're not alone that there have been many thousands or millions of people who've gone through similar things, and that it is possible to stop gaming completely and turn our lives around for the better. Um, and I would say that the best way to seek that if someone is in that situation is to find people who have already made good progress in getting off the games completely and turning their lives around for the better.
That's right. You want somebody who has been through that exact experience, right? Because I don't think somebody who has not had a video game addiction can actually understand what it's a very unique. It's quite, in many ways, it's unique addiction, of course, not completely unique, but in some ways, it's unique compared to others. Yeah, thanks for that. I hope that helps somebody. I guess we're coming to the end now. Do you have any last words that you want to say?
Yeah, yeah, dude. Yeah, I don't know. For myself, I just wanted to say that I don't have anything against video games. Like we were talking about earlier, the ones that I started playing when I was a kid were not addictive. They did
Yeah.
not create any kind of problems in my life whatsoever. So I definitely do not have like a complete disdain for all video games. Yeah. So to point out that there are some that are far more compelling than others, and that there are definitely people who are far more susceptible to addiction than others, and the fact that someone has an addiction and really struggles with this is not really saying anything about the large majority of gamers who are able to do it in moderation and still able to lead fulfilling lives in many other ways. um, the point of recognizing video game addiction is to acknowledge the situation that that small minority of people are in, because it's a very serious, very crippling disorder. Um, and awareness and support is available and needs to be available for the people who find themselves in that situation.
Okay, very good. So we don't want to hate on video games. We just want to give awareness to the fact that it's possible to be addicted to them. And look, how would you? Because I think sometimes people who are addicted to video games will be in a stage where they are not admitting it to themselves, right? So let's put like an hour on it. How many hours do you have to play video games every day to then suspect that you might be addicted? Like if you're playing 6 hours a day, would that potentially be an addiction, or 8 hours? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, it's really hard to put a number on it. Um, as far as I can tell, there are people who can play, that can play many hours without actually developing an addiction disorder over it. So yeah, and like for me, there were long stretches during my active gaming addiction when I was only playing 20 hours a week, because I had I had a family, I had a job, I had other responsibilities. Um, so so I was probably averaging 3 hours a day. At other times it was more like 4 or 5 hours a day. But yeah, it's not something that can be put a number can be put on easily. Like they have a saying in Alcoholics Anonymous, that it's not the number of drinks that you had or how often you drank, but what it does to you when you do drink. And there is such a thing as like a what do they call it? A periodic binge drinker, someone that regularly goes a week or two or three without drinking anything, but then they drink and they just go completely off their rockers and create a ton of trouble in their lives, and because of that trouble they stop drinking again for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, and then the cycle just repeats over and over and over again. So I think that sort of dynamic could also happen with this type of addiction, and it is hard to put a number on it.
Interesting. So it could be a periodic addiction, perhaps, where you actually don't play for 2 weeks and then you get back on a weekend sometime, and then you play for like 15 hours in one day, and then you cut it out again. So it could be periodic sometimes as well.
I mean, I haven't come across any people who have been periodic bingers with video games, but the fact that it exists with other types of addictions, makes me think that it's possible here. But I mean, the point that I was trying to make is that, like, when that's part of the reality, it's hard to just pick a number and say, if you play less than this, you're probably not an addict. If you play more than it, then you probably are. It's more complex than that.
So really, if you want to sort of figure out if you're an addict, perhaps you kind of have to ask yourself some questions. First of all, like, how do you feel? Maybe, how do you feel when you're not playing it? I might be a good measure. If you are getting angry more often, or you are frustrated or tense when you're not playing the games, perhaps that's a sign that you might be addicted.
Yes, absolutely. Because I've worked and talked with many people who are trying to cut out games, both addicts and non-addicts, and there are stark. What their behavior looks like while they're gaming can look very, very similar for the two groups, because they're gaming a lot of hours. It's causing some problems in their lives. Where the big differences show up is when they decide to stop. If I talk to someone and they stop and they said, I have a great week. I can't believe how much I accomplished this week. I feel better. I'm getting more sleep. This is great. I'm glad that I stopped gaming this week. That says to me pretty loudly that this person probably does not have an addiction disorder. What I hear from the people who are showing all the signs and symptoms of an addiction disorder is that it feels a lot worse when they first get off games. They don't have that crutch that they're used for coping. They don't. All these feelings can start coming up. There are withdrawal symptoms that a lot of excessive compulsive gamers have, that show up like mood swings and sadness and suddenly either not being able to sleep or sleeping too much. It can be really difficult, especially the first week, but even the first few months can be very difficult for someone who's actually a gaming addict.
So I guess if you're kind of, because like I said, I bet there are many people, they're playing 6, 7, 8 hours a day, and they're saying to themselves, I'm good, it's all good. I just play games for fun. It's no big deal. I guess the test would be, okay, so we'll stop playing them for 1 week then, and see what kind of how you feel and what effect that has. Are you able to calmly just drop them for a week and just do other things? Is that possible? Because if that's not possible, then maybe there's a problem. Would that be a good test?
Yes, that would be a good test.
Excellent. Okay. That's good. Thank you so much for coming on. Seriously, it was actually really interesting. I'm not completely informed on the personal side of video game addiction. I'm aware of the structure of many games that are trying to make people addicted. But it was really interesting to hear what it's actually like to have a serious addiction about this. So thanks so much for coming on. So any last words you want to say before we finish up?
Well, at the end we were talking about like what might make a good test. There are various diagnostic tests out there for addiction or video gaming addiction, and the support group that I'm active with, Computer Gaming Addicts Anonymous, has a self-test of 20 questions on the website, which is cgaa.info. Generally, if someone answers yes to 8 or more of those questions, there seems to be an excellent chance that they are struggling with an actual addiction disorder. So that's another useful tool that people can make use of.
Cool. Yeah, I'll put it in the description if anybody wants to click that. Put the test, and I'll put your website on there as well. So it's like a community for people struggling with their addiction, I guess.
Yes, well, both for people who are struggling with their addictions and those who want to continue to stay off games and find it very helpful to be connected with other people who are doing similar things.
Yeah, very good. And there's also the Stop Gaming Reddit page as well, I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah, that's a very active forum that includes all kinds of people that want to stop gaming. So that includes both people who have serious problems with it and people who have lesser problems with it.
That's cool. Yeah. So yeah, go and check those out if you think you might have an issue. And yeah, I guess we'll wrap up there. So yeah, once again, thanks so much for coming on, and goodbye everyone. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks, guys.